On the evening of October 14, 1980, a dense fog rolled into the small town of Hollow Creek, wrapping the streets in a ghostly silence. It was the kind of night that seemed to carry weight, like the air itself was holding its breath. Mayor Thomas Eldridge had just wrapped up a late-night council meeting and was seen leaving the town hall around 9:20 p.m., hand in hand with his 9-year-old daughter Emily. According to a janitor locking up the building, the mayor had declined his usual security escort, saying he and his daughter would walk the few blocks together to their nearby home. That was the last confirmed sighting of either of them. At 10:45 p.m., the mayor's wife, Margaret Eldridge, phoned the police, frantic and barely able to speak. Her voice trembled as she reported that her husband and daughter never came home, and he wasn't answering his pager. Patrol units were dispatched immediately, searching the route from town hall to their residence. By midnight, officers discovered the mayor's car parked awkwardly at the edge of North Pine Woods, a dense, isolated thicket known for its confusing trails and wildlife. The driver's side door was wide open. The headlights were still on. Emily's pink backpack lay abandoned on the passenger seat. There was no blood, no footprints, no tire tracks suggesting another vehicle. Nothing that indicated a struggle. And yet something felt wrong. The dashboard clock had stopped exactly at 9:46 p.m., as if frozen in time. Locals gathered behind the police tape, murmuring to each other about old forest legends and the so-called Whispering Pines, a spot within the woods known for strange sounds that had haunted teenagers for decades. A full-scale search began before sunrise, involving more than 100 volunteers, trained dogs, helicopters, and even divers for the nearby river. But for 2 entire weeks, the woods yielded nothing. Not a shoe, not a note, not a trace. The governor sent in state investigators. FBI agents arrived by the 3rd day. Every theory was considered kidnapping, political revenge, mental breakdown, even cult activity. But without a single clue to build from, the case turned cold almost immediately. Detectives privately described the scene as eerily clean, like someone or something had removed all traces of the mayor and his daughter with surgical precision. No ransom demand ever came. No calls, no witnesses. The town slowly began to understand that this was not just a tragedy, it was a mystery that seemed to defy reality. In the months that followed, Margaret Eldridge refused to leave the house. She kept Emily's room exactly as it was and set the dinner table for 3 every night. People in Hollow Creek were deeply shaken. If their mayor could vanish without a trace, so could anyone. Parents began walking their children to school again. Street lights were left on all night, and as Halloween approached that year, for the first time in Hollow Creek's history, not a single child went trick-or-treating. As winter crept into Hollow Creek, the investigation into the disappearance of Mayor Eldridge and his daughter began to unravel. Despite the massive search effort, law enforcement had nothing to show. Dozens of local volunteers had combed every inch of the North Pine Woods, often returning cold, scratched, and demoralized. Helicopters flew overhead daily, using infrared to scan for any sign of life or death. Bloodhounds followed fading scents that led to nowhere. The sheriff, once confident they'd have answers within 48 hours, now avoided reporters entirely. By Christmas, the case had stalled, and a chilling truth began to settle over the town. The mayor and his daughter had vanished without a single trace. Investigators began to dig into the mayor's personal and professional life, searching for any motive or threat. But Thomas Eldridge was widely respected, even beloved. There were no signs of embezzlement, no scandals, and no political enemies bold enough to risk something this extreme. Margaret Eldridge, still devastated, told investigators that Thomas had been receiving anonymous letters in the weeks leading up to the disappearance. She said they were rambling, almost religious in nature, warning of judgment and accusing the mayor of harboring a child of the devil. Unfortunately, the letters were missing. Margaret believed her husband may have destroyed them. The police turned their attention to the church next. St. Gertrude's was the oldest building in town, and Father Gregoran, intense, soft-spoken man with deep-set eyes, had grown unusually close to the mayor's family in recent months. He had even baptized Emily. But when questioned, Father Gregor claimed to know nothing of the letters or any threats to the family. His answers were vague and disjointed, and within days of being interviewed, he abruptly left town without a forwarding address. Still, without hard evidence, police had no grounds to pursue him further. The townspeople, once unified in their concern, began to turn on one another. Rumors flared. Some whispered that the mayor had faked the disappearance and fled. with a secret fortune. Others believed something more sinister, that a secret society or cult had taken him as a sacrifice. Hollow Creek, once a peaceful place where everyone knew everyone, began to fracture. Neighbors watched each other with suspicion. Doors were locked earlier. Strangers weren't welcomed. The atmosphere became thick with paranoia. As the years passed, the case turned into something of a ghost story. Children would dare each other to visit the woods at night, claiming to hear faint echoes of a little girl's laughter. A few claimed to see lights moving through the trees, soft, flickering, and inexplicable. The police eventually boxed up the El Ridge case and filed it away as unsolved. But for the people of Hollow Creek, the mystery never faded. It lingered in their bones. Every time the fog returned, every time the wind howled through the trees, people remembered the night their mayor and his daughter vanished, and how the silence that followed was more terrifying than any sound. By the mid-1980s, life in Hollow Creek appeared to return to normal on the surface, but just beneath, the scars of the mayor's disappearance still festered. People no longer spoke openly about what had happened that October night, but the silence bred something darker. Rumors. And like a virus, those rumors spread slowly, quietly, infecting every family, classroom, and pew. Children whispered about a ghost girl wandering near the old North Pine Trail. Teenagers dared each other to sneak out at night to find her. And some adults, though they would never admit it aloud, began to believe that something in their town was no longer right. It started with strange sounds. Several residents living near St. Gertrude's Church claimed they heard the pipe organ playing at odd hours, 2 or 3 in the morning even, though the church was locked and empty. The organist had passed away years earlier, and the instrument had long since fallen into disrepair. Yet, more than one person described hearing the exact same haunting melody, a slow minor key lullaby that drifted across the cold night air. When the church was investigated, nothing was found. Dusty keys, no signs of entry, no footprints. Still, the sounds continued, and those who lived nearby began to sleep with their windows shut tight. Then came the sightings. At first, only children reported it: a pale girl, standing in the bell tower, wearing a white dress, her face hidden behind her hair. She never moved, never waved, never acknowledged anyone, just watched. When adults checked, there was no one there, but then a retired schoolteacher swore he saw her too, late one night while locking his classroom door. She looked sad, he later told his daughter, but not lost, like she knew exactly where she was. After that, sightings grew more frequent and far harder to dismiss. What disturbed people most wasn't the sightings, it was what began happening afterward. A handful of the children who claimed to see the girl would vanish overnight from their homes. Parents would panic, search the streets, call police. Then, just as suddenly, the child would reappear the next morning, sitting in bed, as if nothing had happened. When asked where they had been, none could answer. They all said the same thing: "I had a dream. She was calling me from the church." Some doctors blamed sleepwalking, others suspected trauma. But no child ever remembered what happened during those hours of absence. And those who returned never quite seemed the same. Fear gripped Hollow Creek once more. Parents forbade their kids from going near the church. Some families moved away entirely, unwilling to risk their own children falling under whatever spell haunted the town. And yet, St. Gertrude's Church stood firm, its rotting pews untouched, its bell long silent, and its doors locked. Though, sometimes, people claimed to see a faint light flickering behind the stained glass windows. A light that pulsed like a heartbeat. A warning, or perhaps, an invitation. By the spring of 1988, nearly 8 years after the disappearance of Mayor Elridge and his daughter, Hollow Creek was barely holding itself together. Businesses were closing, the population was shrinking, and the sense of quiet, dread that lingered over the town had begun to rot it from within. In a desperate attempt to breathe new life into Hollow Creek and, perhaps, symbolically move on from its haunted past, the town council approved a long overdue renovation of St. Gertrude's Church. It was one of the oldest structures in the region, built in 1841, and had fallen into serious disrepair. Termites had eaten through the pews, the stained glass windows were cracked, and the floorboards were warped and dangerously soft. The decision to renovate was met with mixed reactions. Some hoped it would lift the curse the town seemed to carry. Others believed the church should be left alone, calling it tainted or even cursed ground. But the renovation proceeded. On June 3, 1988, a small crew of 6 workers began clearing out the nave, tearing up decades-old wood and debris. Almost immediately, strange things began happening. Tools disappeared. Lights flickered even in broad daylight. Workers complained of an overwhelming sense of being watched. One man reportedly left mid-shift and never returned, telling his supervisor he felt something breathing behind him. While working under the floor, then came the organ incident. On the fourth day, two workers James Holt and Rick Valdez were alone in the sanctuary when they heard a low, resonant chord ring out from the organ. At first, they assumed someone had snuck in, but when they entered the choir loft, the air was freezing cold, their breath visible. Dust covered everything, no footprints, no sign of disturbance. The organ keys were still pressed down, as if an invisible force had just played them. Holt quit that evening, refusing to return. "I don't care about the paycheck," he told his wife. "That place isn't empty. Something lives there." Despite the growing unease, the renovation continued. The town's budget was tight, and canceling the project would have been political suicide. On the 8th day of work, the crew began dismantling the altar to repair the crumbling stone underneath. As they pried apart a foundation block, they discovered something that wasn't in any blueprint or historical record. A brick wall sealed tightly beneath the altar platform. The bricks were newer than the rest of the church's foundation, sloppily laid, like someone had built it in a hurry. The foreman called it a sealed crypt, though there were no church records of any burial or chamber in that location. The atmosphere grew heavier by the minute, as if the building itself didn't want them to go any further. Curiosity, mixed with fear, took hold. They carefully broke through the wall, expecting perhaps a forgotten storage space or a root cellar. But as the final brick fell, a wave of air escaped, stagnant, sour, and inexplicably warm. It smelled like mold, decay, and something else no one could quite identify. A flashlight revealed a small, hidden room carved into the stone. Inside, two rusted iron shackles hung from the wall. The workers called the sheriff immediately. What they had found was no ordinary chamber. What lay beyond that bricked-up wall was the beginning of a truth far more horrifying than anything Hollow Creek had ever imagined. The sheriff arrived at St. Gertrude's Church within the hour, along with 2 deputies and a forensic technician from the neighboring county. The workers, pale and visibly shaken, stood in silence as the officers descended into the newly uncovered space beneath the altar. The narrow stone steps led to a low-ceilinged chamber, just large enough to stand. In the air was thick, humid, and putrid, like something had been sealed inside for decades, festering in darkness. As their flashlights swept the room, what they saw chilled even the most seasoned officers to the bone. 2 skeletal remains, one large, one small, still shackled to the far wall with rusted iron cuffs. The adult skeleton was slumped over, its limbs bound in a way that suggested the person had been held upright for a long time before death. The smaller skeleton, unmistakably that of a child, was curled beside it, both wrists locked in miniature shackles that hung slightly too high above her head. The stone wall behind them was scratched with markings, hundreds of them met by desperate hands over what must have been days, weeks, or even months. At the center of it all, scratched deeper than the rest, were the words, "Forgive me, Father, for I could not be forgiven." The room fell into silence. No one dared speak. No one could. The remains were carefully extracted and sent for analysis, but even before the DNA results came in, Hollow Creek already knew. The adult was Mayor Thomas Elridge, the child was Emily. The entire town, still trying to forget, was thrust back into grief and horror. But there was one more discovery to be made. Tucked behind a loose stone in the corner of the chamber, a worker found a small leather-bound book, molded and decaying, but still intact. It was a journal. Inside were entries, written in a tight, feverish hand. The name on the first page made everyone's blood run cold. Father Matthias Gregor. The journal revealed a descent into obsession. Father Gregor had filled page after page with writings about visions, divine commands, and the child born in sin. He claimed he had been chosen by a higher force to cleanse Hollow Creek and purge it of hidden evil. The entries became more frantic over time, filled with paranoia and twisted theology. He spoke of hearing whispers in the church, of the altar bleeding during communion, of Emily's eyes changing, whether the ravings were those of a madman or something far more terrifying. The last few pages described what he had done: lured the mayor and his daughter into the church, drugged them, and sealed them beneath the altar as an offering. Worse yet, the final lines were written in shaky, fragmented sentences. They scream, "He watches. I hear the bells when no one rings them. She sings in the dark." I cannot sleep, I must seal it before they rise. Father Gregor had vanished shortly after the disappearance. Until now, no one knew why. It seemed he had believed he was carrying out some holy mission, or perhaps he had simply lost his mind. But as the town stared into the dark hole beneath their beloved church, a chilling thought began to settle in. What if it wasn't madness? What if something had been whispering to him? And worse, what if it still was? When news of Father Gregor's journal surfaced, it wasn't just a local sensation, it became a national headline. The FBI took custody of the leather-bound book for forensic analysis, but a copy of the contents had already been made and circulated quietly among the town council and local law enforcement. The pages were stained and warped from time and moisture, but the ink ironically remained strikingly legible. What began as the daily thoughts of a devout man slowly spiraled into the mind of someone losing his grip on reality, or, as some in Hollow Creek feared, someone who had glimpsed a truth the rest of the world refused to see. In the earliest entries, dated late 1979, Father Gregor wrote warmly of his relationship with Mayor Elridge and his family, especially young Emily. He described her as bright, kind, and unusually perceptive for a child her age. But after the new year, the tone shifted. He began describing unexplainable occurrences in the church, unlit candles flickering, voices echoing from the confessional with no one inside, and Emily speaking in her sleep during a blessing ceremony, saying words and languages Gregor claimed to have never heard before. He wrote that her presence disrupted the sanctity of the altar and that she carried within her the mark of the serpent. By March of 1980, the entries were almost unreadable in their manic pacing. He began, referring to Emily as the vessel. He described a vision in which he stood before a cloaked figure at the foot of the altar, told that the sins of the town had infected her bloodline. According to him, only through sacrifice could Hollow Creek be cleansed. He claimed God had gone silent and something older, something deeper had taken his place. Gregor's words oscillated between divine purpose and sheer madness. He believed the mayor had been hiding the truth of her birth and that Emily's life was a ticking clock counting down to a reckoning. One entry, dated just 2 days before the mayor's disappearance, revealed his full plan. He had already prepared the chamber beneath the altar. He wrote about purchasing a sedative and lacing the communion wine. He claimed he wept as he did it, but also rejoiced, believing he was saving the town from something unimaginable. What shook investigators most were his final words. They will beg for answers, but I will not give them lies. Let them dig when the time is right. Let the buried truth be found. No signature, just a final scrawl at the bottom of the page. A simple half-cross, half-circle that did not match any known religious iconography. Experts who examined the journal debated whether Father Gregor was suffering from schizophrenia or some form of religious psychosis. But others noticed something else: entries in different handwriting styles, sometimes mid-paragraph. Analysts confirmed at least 2 other sets of fingerprints on the pages besides Gregor's. No one could explain how, or why. More disturbingly, one postscript dated months after Gregor had supposedly fled town read, "The door has been opened. The silence has not returned. They are watching from the walls." Hollow Creek's authorities kept that page from the public. But by then, it was already too late. The town's darkest secret had been unearthed, and something had been disturbed in the months following the discovery beneath St. Gertrude's Church. Hollow Creek was gripped by a heavy silence that no one dared to break. The town, once known for its harvest festivals, cobblestone streets, and warm community spirit, now existed in a state of quiet dread. A memorial service was held for Mayor Elridge and Emily, but it was poorly attended. Many were too afraid to gather in the same building where they had been imprisoned, and ultimately died. The church was officially decommissioned, boarded up, and surrounded by a tall iron fence. Some believed it should be burned to the ground. Others feared that doing so would release whatever still lingered inside. The town council collapsed under the weight of scandal. Lawsuits were filed against the diocese for negligence, and local newspapers were swarmed with reporters from around the country. But the real damage was not legal, it was psychological. Children began reporting nightmares, many of them involving being locked in dark rooms or seeing a pale girl pointing silently at the church. Some adults claimed to hear bells ringing again, faintly, on windless nights. Others said they dreamed of hollow whispers, calling them by name. Therapists and counselors were brought into Hollow Creek in droves. But none could offer an explanation for the near-identical dreams that haunted dozens of residents. The most unsettling part: the dreams weren't limited to those who had lived near the church or participated in the investigation. People from across the town, even new residents who had moved in after the discovery, began reporting symptoms: anxiety, insomnia, hallucinations. One teenager claimed he saw someone watching him from inside the boarded-up church window, but when police investigated, they found the boards nailed firmly in place. From the inside, it was as if the entire town had become infected by something it couldn't see or name. Something that had been buried for decades, now awakened, despite the church being sealed. A group of local teens attempted to break in one October night, claiming they wanted to film proof of the haunting for their YouTube channel. They never got inside, but one of them, 16-year-old Tyler Riggins, vanished from the group for nearly 3 hours. When he was found sitting by the church gate, he had deep scratches across his chest and arm scratches that looked suspiciously like writing. When cleaned, the scratches appeared to spell a single word: remain. Tyler didn't speak for days afterward. When he finally did, all he could say was, "It wasn't a dream. She's still down there." To this day, no one knows exactly what happened to Father Gregor, or if he died shortly after sealing the chamber. His body was never found. No death certificate was issued, and the journal left more questions than answers. Rumors continue to swirl that there's a second chamber beneath the church, deeper, older, and untouched. Some believe it's where Gregor performed the original ritual, while others think it's a tomb for something that existed long before Hollow Creek was founded. Whatever the truth may be, the town has learned one thing the hard way: some places aren't meant to be unearthed, and some secrets should remain buried beneath stone and silence. Hollow Creek remains on the map, but barely. Tourists don't stop there anymore. Most locals have moved away. The church still stands, wrapped in chains and rusted locks, the iron fence now overgrown with ivy. But every so often, someone claims they hear faint music echoing from inside, an organ playing a lullaby no one remembers learning. And on foggy nights, when the streets are empty and the wind stands still, a soft voice can sometimes be heard, whispering just one word: Father. Whether it's a lingering spirit, a curse, or something far more ancient, no one knows. What we do know is this: Hollow Creek buried its sins deep beneath stone and altar, but the dead, they don't always stay buried.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.